Hello there, Ray here, and today I'm going to show you how you can break all types of bedrock and some other interesting things that you can do with this. I hinted at knowing how to break all types of bedrock in the comments of my very first bedrock breaking video and have been waiting until 1.9 release before showing it. I discovered this bedrock breaking method during the build of the Sand Cityr, and since I was the first to build a sand generator in 1.8, it also meant that I had to overcome some problems that came with the new game's autosave feature, but it also allowed me to discover some interesting things along the way. I mentioned this during the Sand Cityr video, and one of those things was that when an autosave occurred in this pseudo entity processing chunk that my sand generator was in, the falling sand entity would fall straight down and land on the first block that it came upon. So here is that example of the sand generator that I was using towards the beginning. And when an autosave would occur in this pseudo entity processing chunk, the chunk would unload, and upon reloading it would become a pseudo lazy processing chunk for a short time before returning back into a pseudo entity processing chunk. And during this time is where that it is a lazy chunk that the sand would perform this interesting behavior where it would fall until it landed on something. What this sand generator should normally look like when it's operated is that the sand falls down and then gets pushed in by the slime block, and it briefly hits onto this slab here and then enters the entrance end portal, which causes it to duplicate. Here I have my render distance set to 2, and the bluest chunks are the entity processing chunks, and the reddish chunks over there where the sand generator is are the lazy processing chunks. When the sand gen would try to activate in lazy chunks, you can see that the sand is set to the lowest point. You may also notice that all the red sand turned into normal sand. This behavior even got more interesting when testing dragon egg generators. This is an old dragon egg generator that I made a while back. And the way it works is that the piston drops down, allowing the dragon egg to start falling, and then this piston back here pushes it forward and allows it to duplicate into the entrance end portal. When operating the generator in lazy processing chunks, I noticed that the dragon egg was becoming very much destructive, and when I come back I would see that my blocks have been removed by the dragon egg. Here we lost the glass block that was here, and we also lost the slab that was here. When testing these blocks individually, we can see that several different things are occurring. Here we have a red sand block that's held up with this piston, and we just have two torches here underneath of it. And typically, if you unpower this, the red sand would fall down and go through the torches and would end up down here, and upon seeing there was a torch here, it would break off and come in its item form. Now with the same setup, we are testing this while the sand is in a lazy processing chunk. Here you can see that the sand is set immediately upon the first block that it comes in contact with. You can also see that the metadata of the sand turned to its original metadata. Redstone Spire also discovered this, and if we look at the items in our inventory, we can see that sand is labeled as 12/0, where the red sand is labeled 12/1. And this just allowed them, when they added the new red sand, to make a block type that was just like the original one, but it was just changed slightly without having to make an entirely new block. Here we have a very damaged anvil, and it's facing west. And here we just have the same setup where we have the two torches underneath the anvil. And what normally would happen is that the anvil would fall down, and then once it occupied the same space as the torch, it would destroy the torch, and then you would just lose your torch. Now if we test the anvil in a lazy processing chunk, we see that the anvil immediately is set upon the very first block that it comes in contact with. You can also see that the anvil damage value reset to 0, and the anvil is now facing in the north direction instead of the west direction. And if we look at our anvil in our inventory, we can see that the anvil that we started out with was a very damaged anvil, and it was labeled as 145/2. And you can see that it got set back to the original metadata value of 105/0. Here we have another test, but instead we have a dragon egg, and what we normally expect to happen is that the dragon egg will fall, and once it occupies the space of a torch, it sees that it cannot occupy the same space as that torch and will just break off in its item form. But if we have the dragon egg in lazy processing chunks and we let the dragon egg fall, we can see that it immediately removes the torch and occupies the same spot as the torch, and it sets upon the second block that it comes in contact with. So if the first block that it comes in contact with happens to be bedrock, this allows the dragon egg to destroy the bedrock and occupy the same space as it, and it will set upon the second block. Since this bedrock breaking method is not limited to a certain dimension, you can use it to break all types of bedrock. This means you can break the bedrock that is on the floor of the overworld, as well as the floor of the nether, and you can also break the bedrock that is on the nether ceiling. As well, you can also break the bedrock that is in the exit end portal in the end, as well as the end frames that are in the stronghold in the overworld. You can also use this to destroy all types of signs, as well as command blocks, barrier blocks, and you can also destroy chests, and other items that are in them will come out. When the dragon egg replaces a block that it occupies, it also does not cause a block update. This allows us to use the dragon egg to manipulate a lot of different types of blocks, causing some pretty strange things to happen. These first 6 items are all plants, and I currently have the random tick speed set to 0, but the problem with plants is that they eventually cause updates to themselves. And I talked about this when I used the entrance end portal to cause levitating items, and plants will update themselves, so even if you don't cause a block update, they will eventually break off. So if I set the random tick speed to 1000, you see that they eventually all break off. Just as the levitating items in the entrance end portal will break off if you updated them, same thing goes for these, so you don't want to cause a block update next to these things, or even have redstone too close to them. You can create these very cool looking miniature doors, and the weird thing about doors is that opening and closing them does not actually cause a block update. And the weird thing about these half doors is that the texture shows up on this side where the actual door is over here. You can see that the hitbox is right here, so you actually have to be facing this piece here to be able to open and close it. And you can't open and close the iron door, of course. Here we have the 2 halves of the beds, and the bottom half does not let you sleep, where the top half allows you to sleep. So if I set the time to night, I can actually sleep in this bed over here, and it will pass away the time just like a normal bed, and it will keep your spawn point as well. You can also just get the piston heads without the bases, and this is just done by removing the bases with the Ender Dragon egg. And here we have a sticky one and a normal piston, and they were just powered beforehand. And here we have a piston that is sitting up and down, and it looks kind of neat the way that the egg is sitting up on top of that piston there. For some reason, when you try to just remove the head and keep the base of the piston with using the dragon egg method, it just breaks off the whole piston, so that doesn't work. And it also doesn't work if you try to keep decayable leaves out of a tree. The leaves seem to keep updating, and they eventually decay anyways. Here we have your typical size nether portal, and what we did is drop some eggs on top of it, and we removed the obsidian, and since the eggs do not cause block updates, the portal still stays on. And it doesn't matter how many eggs you drop. Once you drop the first egg, you will not be able to, let's say, take out this piece and replace it with the egg, because when you drop a new egg, it will just remove this egg and add the egg back in the same spot without going down any further. Here we have a assortment of items that normally need a block to be attached to. So here we have a torch that's attached to the egg, a ladder, a vine, a lever, redstone torch, a button, stone, and trapdoors work the same way as doors, where opening and closing them does not cause a block update, which is kind of interesting. Tripwire, which I thought would update, but they fixed that. A wooden button, and iron trapdoor. Some things in 1.9 that you can use the egg for is to break the bedrock around the new end gateways, as well as the bedrock that is now on top of the obsidian pillars in 1.9, as well as creating these very strange looking chorus plants that are not connected to anything. In the beginning, you may have noticed that the dragon egg actually broke through several blocks before reaching the bottom. And here's a test where we're going to drop the dragon egg through several blocks that have air in between them. And here we have a block that are 2 blocks that are touching each other. We'll see what happens. So you can see that the dragon egg slowly removes each block at a time until eventually it finds where there is 2 blocks next to each other. This is not actually a visual glitch. If we actually walk here when it's doing its little dropping thing and destroying blocks, you can actually see that we can interrupt it. So what I believe is happening here is that the dragon egg is falling and occupies the space of this block, and believes it's sitting on a block of air here. But then when it knows that there is only air below it, it decides to fall and occupy the next block. And then by that time, it sees that there is no block underneath it to actually hold it up, and it falls again, and it continues this, and when it reaches that spot where there's 2 blocks, it falls and occupies this space, but then it sees that there's a block underneath of it, so it does not continue to fall. So to test this theory, we will have the dragon egg drop in this column, where after this last block here, there is nothing but void all the way down, so no blocks at all. So here you can see that the dragon egg slowly makes its way down, and after the last block, it just vanishes, going right down into the void. In a situation where there is only one layer of blocks at the very lowest layer at Y level 0, and there's no blocks underneath of it because it's a void, we expect the egg to fall, and since it reaches the very last layer and it cannot occupy the space, since there's no block underneath of it, it will go right through it. And this is what actually occurs. The dragon egg will go right through the very last layer of bedrock and just disappear forever. So you cannot actually remove the very bottom layer of bedrock with this method. Here we have a piston that is beside an air gap that is budded, and here we have a piston that is beside a solid block and that is budded. And we'll see that when the dragon egg comes down, it will update the one that is missing the block beside it. So if the block beside it is removed, and it actually updates it, where the one where it just passed on by through it, it did not update this piston at all. This means that if the ender dragon replaces its block, then it will not cause an update. But if it goes through a block and destroys it, then it will cause an update. The dragon egg will see about every single block in the game as a block that it can land on top of. But one block that it can't not land on top of is water, another one is lava. So here we can see that it goes right through both of them. It does not ever attempt to land on top of them or destroy them. So the way you use this in your own survival world is that if you're a single player, it's pretty easy, because when you change your render distance, you also change the amount of chunks that you're loading around you. And this also affects how far away are the lazy processing chunks. So if you're a single player, you can just change this to a render distance of 2. And here I have the lazy chunks over there in the red, and I keep one chunk in between me and them, and I'm over here in this chunk. But what you want to do is make sure that you unload the chunks where the bedrock is that you want to break, and then you can come back in and make sure you don't cross this line, and now you can activate the lever and you can break the bedrock with your dragon egg. If you're playing on a multiplayer server, you probably want to figure out what is the render distance of that server. If you can't figure out what the render distance is of your server, you can always look off in the distance and then adjust your render distance. Start out about at 8 and then keep moving it up. And if you can start seeing new territory when you bring your render distance up, that means the server's render distance is that high or higher. So you just keep bringing your render distance up until you get to a point where you're bringing it up and you're not seeing any new features. And at this point, this is the same render distance as the server. On a server with a render distance of 10, you'll have 8 entity chunks in between you, the player, and the outer ring of lazy chunks out here. And if you're playing on a server with a render distance of 8, you will have only 6 chunks here between the player and the outermost ring of lazy chunks. If you know what your render distance is, you can just have your redstone going out to these lazy chunks out here, and this is where you can put your piston and your dragon egg, and you can have it fall down onto the bedrock. But if you're unsure of your render distance of the server, you can just keep going until you think that you're safely beyond the area and do the same thing. And this was just a kind of safety measure that you can avoid actually knowing what your render distance is. But if you do know your render distance, then you could just come out here to the lazy chunks and place down a snow layer, and then you can just place your dragon egg on top of it and place a light source beside it. And then you could run back to the main area where you should be, back here, and the snow layer here will eventually melt. And when it does, the dragon egg will start to fall, and it will break the bedrock just as if the piston was holding it up. This can be a very helpful technique, especially in areas where you cannot actually have room to put a piston as well as a dragon egg to allow it to fall down. So in this case, the snow layer technique works very well. So you can put your snow layer in and your dragon egg on top of it, and since the dragon egg is transparent, the light source will go down to the snow layer, and then you can leave the area and unload the chunks. And then you come back, I'll just relog, this will reload the chunk. And now you just have to wait for the light source to melt the snow layer, and this will cause the dragon egg to start to fall, and then it will destroy the bedrock just as if there was a piston there. Now if we go over here, we can see that the dragon egg dropped straight through down and destroyed that bedrock there. And this only allowed you to need a 2-meter high area, and you don't really need much more room around here, such as pistons or other stuff in here. Another way to do this is you can also use TNT. Put TNT in there and put the dragon egg on top of it, and then you can just have a redstone line going back. Here I can unload the chunks again. Now when I power it, the TNT will become the entity form, and the dragon egg will immediately fall down into the bedrock. Of course, the TNT does not go off because the chunks back there are lazy chunks and they're not entity processing. So once I come over here, you can see that the TNT will try to explode. There it goes off, and it can destroy the dragon egg. When using this method to break a bedrock, it's best to try to avoid Optifine, because Optifine can kind of mess with chunk loading and how it is loaded and unloaded. There you have it, guys, how to break bedrock with the dragon egg and some very interesting things to use it for. If you found this interesting, show me with a like. If you'd like to see more content like this, subscribe, and don't forget to comment. Bye bye.